whole point of Ayurveda is to free ourselves from old emotional patterns that are literally written, inscribed in the white matter of our brain as a memory, as a record. It's called tarpaka. It means to record these old impressions. So if I don't go into that same cave that had a bear in it last time I went in there, you know better. You don't do the same thing again and again and again.
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. How do you know whether something is harmful or beneficial for you? Do you hear from a friend that it's healthy? Count the calories, carbs, fat, and protein. Maybe you have some intuition about it. Or you just operate based on your desires and cravings. Do dreams ever influence you? Do healthy things always have to be pleasurable? Or will they sometimes be painful or challenging? Sometimes you just hear one word or sound and know that there's a vast ocean there that you want to swim into. My guest today is wildly passionate about Ayurveda. He's a master at connecting ancient wisdom with modern science to help you make sense of your health, the health of those around you, and what's happening on the planet. You're in for a real treat. You're listening to the Wisdom of the Body. Today, I'm here with Dr. John Douillard, who's a globally recognized leader in the fields of natural health, Ayurveda, and sports medicine. He's the creator of LifeSpa.com, the leading Ayurvedic health and wellness resource on the web, with thousands of free articles, ebooks, and videos. With 10 million YouTube views and over 105,000 newsletter subscribers, LifeSpa is evolving the way Ayurveda is understood in the world, joining ancient wisdom with modern science. He's a former director of player development for the New Jersey Nets NBA team, and he's a repeat guest on the Dr. Oz show. Dr. Douillard is the author of 7 health books, including the bestsellers Eat Wheat and the 3-Season Diet. He's written 7 online courses, including yoga journals, Ayurveda 201 on Ayurvedic psychology, and he directs LifeSpa Ayurvedic Clinic, the 2013 Holistic Wellness Center of the Year in Boulder, Colorado. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. John. I'm so excited to have you.
Heather, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, this is just, so exciting to hear your voice and get to talk with you today. And I know the listeners are going to be so excited to hear everything that you have to say today. And I've been such a huge fan of your work, and you've been one of my teachers that I got to study with when I was in Ayurveda school at Mount Madonna, and just such a dynamic teacher, such a great dot connector. I feel like you're able to really pull content from so many different areas to really make things relatable for people. And that's, a challenge that a lot of us have with Ayurveda, I think, in the United States anyways, to try to make it really relatable to people. I think you've done such a great job doing that and will continue to do that. So I'm curious, what is Ayurveda? What's the purpose of it? What's the purpose of this thing called Ayurveda?
The definition of Ayurveda, Ayur's life Veda, is truth. So it really means letting the truth of your life out, who you truly are. And we also know Ayurveda is the science of life. So it's how to live in sync with the natural cycles and live a healthy life and have a healthy body and have a long life. And the longer you live, the more time you have to become more self-aware so you can become more conscious. And then all the tools of Ayurveda, yoga, breathing, meditation, jyotish, they're all tools to remove the obstacles so you can have a more clear, deeper self level of awareness so you can actually be aware of what's true and what's not true. And then fundamentally take action to free yourself from underlying patterns of behavior that don't serve you. At the end of the day, you got to take action. In the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 2, I think it's verse 44, it's Arjuna and Krishna were going into battle, and Arjuna is sort of freaking out because he's got to kill his cousins and his family and all this. It's a whole thing, whole drama. And he freaks out and says, whoa, wait, before we go driving into battle in this chariot, this is crazy. I'm going to kill my cousins who I played with as kids. And then Krishna said, who's sort of like the God figure, said, Yogastha Kamani, which means first establish being and then perform action. So in other words, when you become more self-aware, you access the truth of who you are. And then we have the ability to act on that truth. And that's something that I think is so missing in most of our teachings, even meditation teachings. We learn how to meditate, do yoga, and sit and become still and silent. We de-stress in a way. But we never are taught how to take that silence into action, how to kind of take it off the mat, if you will. And that's really what Ayurveda is about. It's about taking transformational action to free yourself from underlying patterns of behavior. And that's something that most folks don't generally practice because we get so wrapped up in the pulling back the bow part, but we don't shoot the arrow. And that means taking it into your life, living a sattvic life, taking honesty and purity. And what's really crazy is I wrote an article not too long ago about the epidemic or the pandemic that we're having, but in Charaka, there's a whole chapter or section of where they talk about epidemics. I don't know if you read that or if you saw that article that came out, Heather, but it was really shocking because 2,500 years ago when they wrote this book, and it was written that the cause of an epidemic was because of corruption at the heads of state, and how when you have corruption at that level, it filters down to the people, and the people become corrupt. And when the people become corrupt, they create an unsattvic, rajasic energy, which actually gets impregnated into the environment and into nature. And then short order, you have droughts and floods and water you can't drink and air pollution. And they talked literally about all these things that come from us not living what Ayurveda's purpose is, that finding and becoming conscious, not engaging in a lifestyle or a behavior that is just completely designed to get you to be happy by manipulating your environment, being this way with that person and this way with this situation and another way with another situation, your family, when you go home for the holidays, you act like a 4-year-old. I mean, all these things are us somehow trying to feel safe and secure, which is a beautiful sentiment, but we have to pull back that bow, establish being, become aware of what's real. And even if that real is delicate, we have to find the way to let those delicate petals of our flower open so we can eventually start taking baby steps, but action, shoot the bow, shoot the arrow, and take action so we can become conscious again. 95% of the things that we think and say and do as adults, according to multiple studies, is unconscious, meaning that they're based on impressions that we experienced in the first 5 or 6 years of life. So we were thinking 95% of the stuff we're doing based on stuff that happened when I was under 6 years old. That's unconscious. I can't even remember being under 6 years old. You know what I mean? It's so unconscious. And Ayurveda's like, we get it. You're going to engage in all this crazy behavior as a kid to make mom and dad like you and love you. It's part of the human survival. You need mom to look over and you want them to watching over you, otherwise you get eaten by a lion, right? So the whole point of that needing approval was part of the survival mechanisms as a child. But we have to then step out of needing to be loved and then needing to be loved as we step into the Ayurveda of us, the truth of us.
Well, I love that. So you've covered a lot, and I'm taking from that for the listeners, and some of them may not be as familiar with Ayurveda, or they may not have even heard of the Bhagavad Gita, right?
Right.
But the story that you shared about Arjuna and Krishna and this idea that your dharma or what is required of you in a moment, it's so influenced by your past and your upbringing and all these things. But there's this job that you have to do like right in front of you. And you're taking all of your stuff from the past to that moment. And it may or may not be real in that moment. And that's what's so tricky. Isn't it weird to think that we have this whole field of psychology? And I studied psychology in undergrad, so I guess I have a little bit of a passion about this. So we have this whole field of psychology, and we have this whole diagnostic and statistical manual that has all these different afflictions of the mind and illnesses, mental illnesses they're called and stuff like that. But in reality, each one of us is like just a couple of degrees away from not seeing reality in any given moment because of this. And that the thing that's so beautiful about Ayurveda and yoga is that it actually gives us a practice to be able to see reality, to kind of clear out. And you've done such amazing work for the last 40 years or more even. I just know about your work for the last 40 years. You've been working with clients for something like 40 years. You wrote your first book, Mind, Body, and Sport, nearly 20 years ago. And For you, finding this path, like how did you come to this path of, how did you even hear about Ayurveda and yoga?
That's an interesting question. For the listeners the Bhagavad Gita thing and the Krishna thing, it's just part of the Vedic mythology in a way. And it's just a story about how we are so affected by the outside world and we choose to live our life based on the outside world and what we think it needs and what we think and how we think we can manipulate it to feel good. And we rarely explore our own inner space. And that's what really Ayurveda is about, is that there's another half of this equation. It's not all what your eyes see and your nose smells and your ears hear from the outside. Those senses bring awareness on the inside. And there's just as much space on the inside as there is on the outside. But anyway, when I wrote Body, Mind, and Sport, I was in chiropractic college and I was studying acupuncture, taking a 500-hour course in acupuncture. And this is like in the early 1980s, like 1981. And I heard the word Ayurveda. And I had meditated. My mom taught me TM when I was 16 years old. So I had been meditating, or at least had that in my toolbox from a young age. And my mom was super into health, and she's still great. So when I heard the word Ayurveda, just something about that word, like the word acupuncture didn't thrill me. Even the word chiropractic, I knew that I went to chiropractic because I knew that I wasn't going to do chiropractic for my whole life. I knew it. I just said, this is good, but this is not what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. But when I heard Ayurveda, I don't know what that is, but I got to find out what it is. I didn't even know what it was. And then I started digging into it. I became more and more passionate. And then in 1986, I had the opportunity to go to India to try to find a teacher and study Ayurveda. I was actually going to go to Tibet and ride our mountain bikes from Lhasa, Tibet to Kathmandu because the Chinese government had just opened up the roads and you could do it. And we had all these permits ready. And like 6 of us were going to go. And then all of a sudden, my sister calls me up and she says, John, her husband was, if you're old like me, remember a magician named Doug Henning who was like, he did all like the TV magic specials on TV. He was like the magician before David Copperfield, and he was very famous. And he was like really into real magic too. He was meditating. He was into TM and all that as well. And he had this like lucid dream that the road collapsed and I paralyzed from the waist down. And I was playing wheelchair basketball 10 years later. And he's, please don't go on this trip. Please, please, please. And I'm going, you guys are crazy. I can't not go. I've got people counting on me. We're going to do this. My mom calls me up like 3 weeks later and she's, John, around the same time Doug had his lucid dream, I had this also sort of vision, sort of lucid dream. My mom's pretty legit. Like she's really spiritual, but she's balanced and stable and like normal. And she said, I had a similar dream. There was a major accident and you're really severely injured and there were helicopters and can you please not go? And I go, oh God. So ended up, long story short, I didn't go. My sister was going to India with Doug, and they said, we're going to India, and you can stay at our place in Delhi. They were going to go see Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the founder of TM, and you can stay with us, and you can go try to find Ayurveda and study. I'm like, okay, good, I'll go. So I went, and then I met Maharishi the night I got there. It was a big celebration. She introduced me to him. He looked at me, and he didn't know anything about me or what I was there. He looked at me, and he goes, I'd love to teach you Ayurveda. And I was like, holy cow. That was easy. I came here to learn Ayurveda. I haven't been here for 12 hours. And I got an invitation to study. And I'm going I go, that sounds great. Yeah. And he goes, yeah, but I want you to stay here permanently. I'm going like, what? Permanent? Are you crazy? Like, no, I can't do that. I've got $50,000 in school loans. I got to practice in Boulder, Colorado. And there's no way. I can't do that. We went back and forth. He goes, why don't you just stay here for a couple of weeks and see how it goes? And then the next morning, a little boy knocks on my door and he says, Dr. John? And I said, yes. And he says, come. And he takes me to who turned out to be one of my dearest friends on the planet, my first Ayurvedic teacher, Dr. Raju, who is just a phenomenal pulse diagnostician. And anyway, I ended up following him around for the next solid year and pretty much stayed in India for about a year and a half and then went back and forth for many years after that. And learned Ayurveda sort of like he was taught from his father and his grandfather, actually, where I just followed him around. And, if I had questions, he would answer. He taught me in a way that was so beautiful because I learned from my experience. And if I had a question, he would answer my question. But if I didn't have a question, he didn't teach. So it's all based on my interest in a way, in my exploration of my own self, my own pulse and things like that. So that's how I got into it. And then learning a little bit about yoga and breathing. And I was on a walk with a yogacharya and they were nose breathing. And we were walking up this hill and up this mountain. And I was like a triathlete. I'd done Ironman, all that stuff way back, and not that way back, but a while before that. And so I was in pretty good shape. And these guys were like old. And breathing like effortlessly, and I was like huffing and puffing, and it was just really clear to me that nose breathing was something that was really, really important. So I started writing my book in 1986, Body, Mind, Sport. It took me 10 years to get a publisher and finally published it in 1994 was when it actually got published. The first time we revised it in 2001, I think. But yeah, that's the story. And it was just, for those people who are listening, if you're a student of Ayurveda, I mean, it's just like being told by every publisher on the planet that I could not. Every agent turned me down. I mean, it was just, I had no agent, I had no publisher. Everybody thought I don't even know how to write. You're terrible at writing. You don't even know how to write. You know, when I was a kid in school, I was like, I had the A over C as a writer. A for your content, but C, you suck basically at writing. Like your grammar is terrible and you can't spell. And I literally can't spell to this day. I have to ask my wife all the time, how do you spell like the stupidest things? I just don't have that kind of a brain. Everybody I told I was going to write a book, they said, you write a book? Like, it was just unbelievable how many times I was told I couldn't do it. And I don't know why I kept going. I just said, well, I think I can do it. And that was my parents. My parents gave me that. You can do whatever you want. You can do anything you want. There's no any limits on what you can do. And so I didn't have those limits. And I just looked at those people like, they're so small to say that to me. And how could they say something like that to another person? You know, I don't know if you saw Michelle Obama recently when she was speaking. There was a show on recently, like sort of her memoirs. She was told she couldn't go to Princeton. And she was like, she just proved them all wrong and just became this amazing human being. And I was like, yeah, that's me. You know, I was told I couldn't be this and I couldn't be that. And because I wasn't an academic, I was definitely a late bloomer. I mean, I went to aeronautical school out of college and then I got a pilot's license and learned how to do that. And I was going to go into the Navy and fly, but they couldn't promise. They couldn't promise me jets. They just gave me helicopters. And I was like sort of stuck up and I don't want to do helicopters. That's too easy to get shot down. Jets go faster. So anyway, I didn't pursue that completely. Ended up going to aeronautical school and then went to civil engineering school and then ended up going to stunt school in LA because I ended up teaching skiing in Vail, Colorado, and the stunt coordinator came and ended up inviting me to learn stunts. So I ended up going to LA and did stunts for a while and did triathlons. And that's how I got into triathlons and then ended up getting hurt a lot, jumping off of buildings and doing things in triathlons, doing stunts and 5 falls and things like that. And ended up seeing a chiropractor in LA and who was part of the school, the Los Angeles College of Chiropractic. And that's where I ended up going because I just saw the value of how valuable the right kind of chiropractic can be. And that's the story. I don't know if that's what you asked.
Wow.
Anyway.
That is amazing. That's way more than I ever expected. I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing. It sounds like it's funny as you're talking about Michelle Obama and the obstacles that sort of felt like they were in your way of, you know, pursuing writing your book and getting it published and things like that. It makes me think of this book that my kid has, which is about Neil Armstrong. And there's a really great song that goes with it. It's called I Want to Go to the Moon. And it's this story basically about from the time he's a little boy, he looks up at the moon and he's like, I want to go there. And every couple of pages in the book, there's somebody going, you'll never go to the moon. You'll never go to the moon. And he's like, but I'm building rocket ships in my yard and I want to go to the moon. And everyone's saying you'll never go to the moon. And then one day he'll wash the dishes, you know, he'll do everything to get there. And one day he gets asked to go to the moon and the dream is realized. And so it's, I think for a lot of us, yeah, I mean, I had that similar experience of, you know, getting turned down from publishers and stuff like that. And it can be pretty grueling. I think, yeah, it's such a important point for anybody who's pursuing a goal and also getting back to your own path and how you got to Ayurveda. It sounds like you were doing some things that were pretty physically demanding, maybe taking on some risks, you know, skiing and things like that. And that is that sort of the physical stuff that drew you to wanting to study chiropractic care in the first place? Maybe was it like your own injuries and things like that?
No, I think it was my mother. I was a ski racer as a kid and stuff, so teaching skiing was just sort of a no-brainer, and so that was really fun. And my mom was like okay with that idea. But when I went to LA and started doing stunts, and she was like, "You're a playboy. You're just gonna go into Hollywood." Because we were from like a small town in New York, upstate New York, and she just didn't think that me in Hollywood. She was just like not happy. So she kept like pushing me to get a career and get a skill. And so she was the one who kept sort of bringing up chiropractic, like it's a health field and you can do it. And, you know, she was really into that sort of alternative medicine when we were kids. So it was an easy thing. And I got so much benefit from it. And it turned out that the chiropractor I was seeing was the admissions director. And he really liked me and we had a good relationship. So I had this in. And so it was just sort of like the door opened, you know, sort of like when the door opened when I went to India. It was like, all you got to do is just say yes. I love that Jim Carrey movie, just say yes. And that's all I did when I went to India. I closed my practice from a scratchy phone in Delhi. Back in the day, you couldn't call people from India. You'd have to wait like an hour to get a line, and the line would be barely audible. And my partner in Boulder, who I had a practice with, he could barely hear me, and I could barely hear him. And all I could really get across was, I'm not coming home. And he was like, what? I'm going, yeah, I got to stay here. This is too important. I don't know what's going on, but I'm just going to stay here and learn Ayurveda. And he just couldn't understand it. And when I got back, somebody I didn't even know was driving my car. All my stuff was in like 5 different houses. It was just crazy. But I just said, like, whatever, yes. And I think, if there's a message, and I try to teach that to my kids, because now we have 6 kids, and it's just a beautiful family, and it's been going great. And I just try to pass on what my parents taught me, which was do the thing you hate and fear to do. And that was my mom's motto in life. Go through your fear and take action. Particularly, one of my favorite quotes in the world is, to the extent that something affects you is to the extent that it's your karma, which means your opportunity to take action. So if it's a fearful thing, or if it's a stressful thing, or a thing you can't do, you cannot let that take over. And that was drilled into my head from my mom in a very kind and gentle way, not forceful or anything. It was just like, you got to do the thing you hate and fear. So I'd be like LA, like climbing up a ladder through a skylight with a big step ladder on top of the skylight, and we dive through this little mat. It didn't look very big from up there. And I'd be climbing up the ladder, and you go up like 5 steps and jump, and then do it again, go up another couple of steps and jump. So you work your way up to it. The whole way I'm going, do the thing you hate and fear to do, do the thing you hate and fear to do. Because I was scared to death jumping through this skylight. But I was just absolutely pathologically nervous, scared public speaker. It was one of my hugest fears in the world. So I joined Toastmasters to help me get through that in college. And even then, I was still terrible at speaking. And it's a crazy thing. The stuff I was told I was so bad at, because I was told I was a terrible speaker too. I now speak for a living and I write for a living. It's like crazy. Like, that's the 2 things I was told, don't even go there, because you basically can't do that. And that's what I do for a living. It's crazy, right?
That's amazing. Yeah. And some of the themes that you've written about with your books, it seems like training, and the idea of training this is one of my takeaways from your work, is that there's a theme of training, and that you can sort of train yourself to do things and to be comfortable with things. And just as an example of that, you wrote a book called Eat Wheat. And that's interesting because it seems like everybody these days believes that their gut issues are caused by dairy and wheat, for example. I mean, I don't know how many times probably 75% of my clients are have a gluten fear, even if they don't have a gluten allergy. So I love that you wrote this book, because once our mind concludes that something is bad for us, or it's hurting us, or something like that, a lot of people just sort of lock it up in the box and don't come back to it. And I feel like your book maybe gives people a little bit of hope that, well, actually there's ways you can sort of get this back into your life. Could you talk a little bit about that book and some of the main ideas that came out of that for you?
Yeah, of course. It means that you're right. Everybody seems to think that the public enemy number 1, and we should avoid it like the plague. Yet, studies show that there was gluten in the teeth of ancient humans 3.5 million years ago. We acquired an enzyme called amylase, or not an enzyme, a gene. We expressed a gene, rather, 2 million years ago for digesting starch. A deficiency in the amylase enzyme is called Baker's asthma. It's an allergy to wheat. So to say that we didn't eat grains, Africa was covered with grasslands. Wheat and barley just grew wild there. I mean, that's what they did. And it's so weird to me that all of a sudden wheat became this public enemy. Now, yeah, there's different kinds of wheat. Even when I did interviews with David Perlmutter, the author of Grain Brain, 2 battles. The first one was a real battle, because I was all about eating, and my book was Eat Wheat, right? And my mother said I won that debate, so you should all listen to that. But his premise was that wheat causes diabetes and causes Alzheimer's. And, the studies show that it absolutely doesn't. And for so many studies, they show that that wheat, good wheat, whole wheat, actually reduces the risk of Alzheimer's by 53% and reduces the risk of diabetes massively. And there's some massive studies that just completely disprove what he's saying. Now, when you're eating Wonder Bread, that's a different animal. It's not bread. It's been highly processed, bleached, boiled, deodorized oils they put in to make it stay squishy forever and ever and ever. So people eat these terrible foods. they can't digest them because the oils in them are basically indigestible for the bugs that usually eat oil. So all the oils that nobody will digest go to your liver, and they congest your liver, and they cause the liver to not make bile. And when you don't have bile, you don't scrub or clean your intestinal tract. You don't emulsify the good fats or the bad fats, and you don't neutralize the acid you need to have strong acid to break down the wheat and the dairy. So all of a sudden you can't eat wheat and dairy, and you blame it on the wheat and the dairy, and I get that. But the problem is that by taking this stuff, because we just gotten so good at just saying, well, don't eat wheat, don't eat dairy. Now it's nuts, seeds, lectins, beans, legumes, tomatoes, zucchini. You just like everything you can't eat because they're hard. And people don't realize that the goitrogens, the oxalates, the nitrate, the nightshades, the lectins and the glutens and all these hard to digest proteins, they are hard to digest. And if good digestion will always digest them mostly, but there will be some of those undigested proteins that will go into your small intestine, and they will be too big to get into your bloodstream. And they will get uptaken into the collecting ducts of your lymphatic system, and they will congest your lymph, giving you a big belly, brain fog, skin rashes, tiredness, lethargy, chronic fatigue. All these things will happen because your lymph system, which is your drains, will become congested. But even more importantly, studies show when you take those foods out of the diet, you take gluten out of the diet, all of a sudden your immune system becomes compromised because those sort of rogue undigested proteins that go into your intestinal tract, they act as the irritants and the stimulant for gut immunity. And if you basically don't eat those foods because you just don't feel good eating, you take X, Y, Z and the whole alphabet out of your diet, next thing you know, you don't have the irritants that are required for gut immunity, which is 70% of your immune reaction. Studies show that people who eat wheat versus people who don't eat wheat, people who eat wheat have 4 times less mercury in their blood than people who are gluten-free. They have significantly more killer T cells, a measure of immunity, than people who are gluten-free. They have significantly more good bugs and less bad bugs than people who are gluten-free. The studies show that these foods are why we have an immune system, and gut immunity is 70% of our whole immune response. They did a study with Amish kids and Hutterite kids. Hutterites are, they all come from the same little valley in Switzerland. And they came here. The Amish kids stayed they have cows as pets and they run around barefoot in the barns and old traditional farming. And the Hutterites, they became like modern farmers, everything's sterile. Hutterites have the highest rates of asthma on the planet, and the Amish kids have the lowest rates of asthma on the planet. They have the exact same genetics. Why? They studied the air in the barns with the Amish kids, and they have the dust acted as an irritant to the respiratory tract to stimulate an immune response, antidote them from asthma. This is called the hygiene hypothesis, which suggests that we need these harder to digest foods. We can't live in a bubble. We can't keep taking stuff out of our diet. We can't keep living in a more sterile environment because our microbiome needs to be diverse. Our gut, which then supports gut immunity and keeps the body alive. And that digestive system that breaks down, which is why you can't eat wheat and dairy, nuts, seeds, legumes, all that, is exactly the same pathways are used for your detoxification. And in 2019, 70 million tons of toxic chemicals were dumped into our atmosphere in 2019, according to the EPA. We breathe, we have to digest those things. Those fat-soluble mercury pollutants and environmental pollutants in the air that we breathe or that we experience on the foods we eat, they have to be broken down by our digestive system. So if you can't digest wheat, and you once were able, right, you don't have celiac, then how are you going to break down all these toxic chemicals in this environment? You're not going to. So you kick the can down the road and say, oh, well, I'll just stop eating wheat. I feel so much better. But you've never solved the problem. You've actually set yourself up for a much bigger problem down the road. And that's why I wrote Eat Wheat, because when I got into practice in 1984, I would take people off of wheat and dairy and give them digestive enzymes and probiotics all the time. And it became very clear that they got better. But then 6 months later, they were right back to where they were. We never solved the problem. And it's so weird to me that all of a sudden, like 30 years later, Western medicine figured out wheat and dairy are hard to digest and food has something to do with how people feel. And we should then take wheat and dairy and designate it as public enemy number 1 and number 2. And then all of a sudden, everybody's like, wheat's really bad. I'm going like, holy cow, this is like living on a different planet. Like we knew that 3 decades before this. And it was so shocking to me that everybody got on this bandwagon that wheat is sometimes somehow harmful. Yeah, the processed wheat is terrible, and there's things we can do. We absolutely can find good whole wheat, whole grain. You can buy wheat berries and grind them up yourself and make bread. All you need is wheat, salt, and water to make bread. That's it. Look at the loaf of bread that's on your counter in your grocery store. There's nothing, you can barely find wheat, salt, and water in there. And the impact of a poor digestion is so prevalent. 74% of the American population right now experience some type of digestive concern. So it's a big deal. And you can't fix it by stopping to eat the food. I mean, for a while you might need to, but let's fix the problem. And Ayurveda is all about that. Ayurveda is like 85% of all disease comes from your digestive system, which is fundamentally, it's the integrity of your intestinal skin, the barrier in your intestinal tract that protects you from the outside world. And if that's broken down, you're in trouble. And the first system to get clobbered by all those environmental pollutants and undigested foods is your lymphatic system, which is the drainage system, the garbage can for all the waste, a delivery of fats properly broken down for cellular energy. So you will be exhausted if that lymph is congested, and you will have extra weight around your belly and your hips and cellulite and all these, swollen wrists and ankles and allergies and tiredness and headaches and brain fog. And all these things come from poor drains. This is the Rasa in Ayurveda, and the study of Rasa is Rasayana, which is the one branch of Ayurveda that studies longevity. So the study of longevity is the study of the lymphatic system, which starts in your digestive tract and is the carrier of your immune system, the deliverer of energy, and the garbage can. And if those three things go bad, you're going to pay. And that all is based on the integrity of your intestinal skin. It's like the three little bears in there. If you're too dry, a little constipated, too wet, a little loose, it ain't just right. And for your bugs to flourish and become diverse and give you gut immunity, which is what you need, it needs to be just right, the environment. And now we know that the gut immunity and the gut bug microbiome is intimately linked to the respiratory tract lung microbiome. They used to think your lungs were sterile, but they're not. They're loaded with bugs, and they're based on, there's a bidirectional pathway from lungs to gut, from gut to lungs. So if you have a bad digestion, you are going to be more vulnerable to something like COVID or the next crazy virus that comes down the pike. And those are the two entry points of a viral infection, is through the skin or the epithelium of your lungs, your respiratory tract, and the skin of your digestive tract. And those are two of the most important barriers of your body. One is your outer skin, and the other one is your blood-brain barrier, which is also epithelial and skin. So it's all about your skin. That's the bottom line. So keeping your inner skin happy is what makes your outer skin look good. If that's what you're after, treat the inside.
Are you kind of curious about how creation works? It's not really easy for our intellectual minds to get it. My book, The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility, outlines the 4 fertility factors of Ayurveda, and these factors can be applied to whatever seeds you're trying to plant right now: conceiving a child, creating a new business, or planting a garden on your back patio. Head over to heathergrish.com to learn about the book. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. Yeah, it's amazing. A lot of people probably don't realize how important skin is, both on the inside and the outside. And the interesting thing about all that you've talked about is that it's actually changeable. These are changeable situations as well. So if there is something off, that there are things that we can do to cultivate a new condition. And it's interesting, hearing you talk about the immunity piece, because I'm about to send my 3.5-year-old kid to preschool to play with other kids. And that's obviously got me freaked out because we're still sheltering and things like that. And I have a really super healthy kid. I swear he never gets sick ever.
That's great.
But I try to do whatever I can at home to keep his immune system strong and teach him the things that do that. Because, there are things in the world that our bodies are not used to, that we do need a little bit of extra horsepower to deal with, right?
Absolutely. I actually wrote a book called Perfect Health for Kids because I ended up having so many kids and then treating so many kids in my practice. And there's so much we can do to keep those kids healthy. And you're blessed when you have a kid who never gets sick because they have really a very, very strong, robust immunity. And that's going to really, really important. And I think some of the keys to that are, making sure they maintain diversity and give them exposure to dirt and to don't scrub all your foods so clean there's no bugs on them. We really need that diversity. It's one of the reasons why Life Spa I use predominantly whole herbs, and we test them for the bugs before. We just got a report that came in the other day that one of our herbs had too many bugs in them because the science is still way behind the research. So I talked to my manufacturer, who's one of the top people in the herbal world in the country, and he said, John, all the bugs in your product are great. Because what they do with herbs, if they have too many bugs, they burn them. They heat up the product and they kill some of the bugs so it fits the standard of America. And he goes, there's a high limit. In mine, we're still within the limit. They're sort of like what they shoot for, according to the science. And he said, I wouldn't touch this product. This is like full of probiotics. This is like an inoculator of your gut with good bugs. And that's what plants do. They bring the bugs with them into your gut. And, taking some Ayurvedic herbs, which have much more diversity than we're going to ever get in America, because everything's become so sterile and mono kind of cultured here. We don't have the diversity available. That's why when you go to Europe, you come back. We did studies with people. They go to Europe, and we had them take probiotics before and after they came back. We measured their bugs before and after. And when they came back, they had way more diversity than they had before they left. So we need to look for ways to expose ourselves to more diverse bugs. And the more they're seasonally taken is even better, because the bugs in your gut are supposed to change from one season to the next. You're supposed to have bugs in your gut this time of the year that are really good at digesting carbs and starches. The amylase enzyme for starch in your body increases in everybody's body at this time of the year, when the wheat and all the fruits and all that stuff's being harvested. In the spring, there is no grain to be had. You can't find a piece of starch on the planet if you wanted to in the spring, right? It's just very austere. It's the fasting time of the year. And you have a whole different set of bugs in the body that are really good at digesting fat and fiber, which is basically all you're going to get, your own fat and some fiber. If you're going to hunt, probably you have to, you get the fat that way. But the microbiome changes. And what we do in America, we eat the same stuff, starch for 30 years in a row. We wonder why you have prediabetes. We have nothing but bugs that do nothing but starch. And when they have all those bugs inside your gut that love starch, and you've grown a stable of bugs in there that do nothing but that, and then they send a message to your brain, because it's a bidirectional pathway. It says, I need more starch. I need more sugar. So next thing you know, we're craving more and more sugar, more and more starch. And we end up overwhelming our bloodstream with sugar, because we became really good at delivering sugar. But nature said, no, this is so stupid. Why would you do sugar all the time? It doesn't exist in nature all the time. You go from an austere spring to reset a different stable of bugs to then, yes, a stable for sugar in the fall. And then you have an annual nutritional cycle, which is actually quite balanced, as opposed to overwhelming the body with the same kind of bugs that digest the same kind of stuff. And then we end up, running out of those foods on the planet, because that's all anybody eats, because sugar is sweet, right?
I hadn't thought about the bugs are changing seasonally. I mean, I love the topic of your book, The 3-Season Diet, and the work that you've been doing about seasonal eating, and that obviously Ayurveda has been teaching about for thousands of years, with seasonal, eating what's available at that time of year. And it's just this, I didn't realize that the bugs would change, but it makes complete sense that if the environment changes, that the microbes are also changing as well. And it's weird because, like, if you cut open a tree and you look at the rings of a tree, you could see that things go through cycles. And who are we to think that we as humans don't need to go through cycles as well?
Oh my God, that's Nobel Prize winning science, is circadian medicine. That's such an important piece of the puzzle. I first did the research when I first started writing that. I found studies that show that soil bugs change from season to season. So I'm going, oh, well, that's obvious. That makes sense that our bugs would change from season. So I threw it out there, like, this is probably why we should be eating seasonal. And then a Stanford study came out a few years back and confirmed that, in fact, the Hadza tribe, the last remaining hunter-gatherer tribe, their bugs dramatically change from season to season, and that's just the way it's supposed to be. That's why we published my 3-Season Diet book. I mean, I thought it was really good, but nobody really read it. It didn't become like a bestseller. I mean, it actually did when Amazon relaunched it. It then did really well. But when it first came out, I was like, anybody wanted to hear another diet, But it turns out that, so I ended up putting together what we call the 3-Season Diet, seasonal monthly guide, where people get a free grocery list, recipe list, and a superfood list for every month of the year for free. Because I just think it's so important people just to know, hey, this is what's in season in October or November or December, and I can eat these recipes. I can go to the grocery store and try to eat more of these foods because they're in season. Not only seasonal eating, but get medicinal dosages of what nature's trying to deliver because it changes your gut. They did a study. This is crazy. And this is the one that blew my mind, where deer were eating leaves in the wintertime, or bark in the wintertime and leaves in the summer. And they have bugs for leaves in the summer, and they have different bugs for bark in the winter. And when they gave the deer bark in the summer, they had the wrong bugs for digesting bark. And it caused such a level of indigestion, it almost killed the deer. And I was like, wait a minute, what?
Wow.
Are you kidding me? Deer potentially die when they eat out of season, and we have no clue what's in season. We eat stuff from all over the world. We have no idea. And this was after I wrote the 3-Season Diet book, way after. And that's when I decided to just say, I just need to put this stuff out for free. People can just get it. And that's what our free monthly guide is all about, so people can just get that info and realize that how important it is. I mean, Ayurveda, this is Ayurveda. Ayurveda is not really about eating for your body type. Ayurveda is about eating with your seasons, and then you overlay your information about your body type. If you're really super hot, then yeah, cooling foods in the summer are going to be really important for you. You overlay that information, but it was never about eating only for your body type. You're a Pitta body type, and you're supposed to eat cooling foods in Vermont in January in 1800s. Where do you get apples? Or where do you get cooling foods? It's meat and potatoes or something, it's it. So it wasn't how Ayurveda did it. Ayurveda was intimately connected to nature, and everybody ate with the seasons because that's all you could do. There were no refrigerators or trucks driving stuff around.
Yeah, and we've really gotten on this path, and the way that the supermarkets bring in food and everything, like we do have all of this food available to us that is off season. It's available to us all seasons, and we as individuals have to do the work, I think, to change that based on how we spend our money and what we're choosing.
Yeah, it's actually why I wrote the 3-Season Diet Guide, which is so people can have, a simple way to go, okay, here's some recipes for October, and here's some superfoods for November, and, that I'm going to try to eat more of, and then enjoy, because you generally crave what's in season anyway, if you listen carefully. And when you start getting your body linked up to the circadian cycles, craving the right foods in the right season, eating at the right time, going to bed at the right time, and your body starts to go downstream with the current, life becomes a dream. It's sort of like you don't finish your day exhausted or stressed out or have to recover on the weekends. In nature, you don't see the deer and the elk. A lot of elk here. They're just chilling, It's like life doesn't seem so hard for them. Mm-hmm. But for us, it's a massive struggle. And it's just because we're so upstream against the current. And that's Ayurveda 101, or what now we know as Nobel Prize winning science, circadian medicine.
And just going back to this idea of that you could train yourself to do things. And now we're in this pattern of training ourselves to listen to nature again, that we got so far away from it that it actually requires training now to get back to it.
Yeah, so true.
I wanted to just ask you one more question, just because I know we're getting close out of time, but I know this is something you're so passionate about. I recently watched your interview with James Nestor about his book, The Breath. And I know you've been writing about this, and it sounds like it was a huge inspiration for your book, Body, Mind, and Sport, 20 years ago. And hearing you describe that experience of walking with these people who were a lot older than you, and you were training, you were a triathlete, and these seemingly way older people are breathing much more easily than you. It sounds like breath practices are really something that are very important to you, where you think there's a lot of opportunity for people. And can you think of one breathing practice that is kind of safe and beneficial for a lot of people to try if it's something they're interested in getting into?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, James Nestor wrote an amazing book called Breath, and he's become a dear friend of mine. Actually, we've communicated consistently since we had that interview about a month or so ago. And it was so rewarding for me to see him, write about my research. So we published studies on nose breathing versus mouth breathing exercise in the early 1990s. So it was really rewarding for me to see that some of my work was, that now nose breathing has become the big, huge thing. And when I was teaching nose breathing, I was the crazy guy. So even though we had published studies, it didn't matter. People didn't want to hear it. So I am so passionate about pranayama. I've been teaching it for decades. I practice, when I have time, at least an hour of breathing per day. And when I don't have time, at least 15 to 20 minutes. I mean, I rarely miss a day of doing my breathing. And then, of course, when I have the time, I do the yoga and the meditation with it. But the breathing is the key. And there's so much I've written about almost every pranayama technique and the science to back it up. And the common denominator, Heather, of all the pranayama breathing techniques and chanting and all these different techniques that are Vedic was that they changed neuroplasticity. And as we started this conversation, the whole point of Ayurveda is to free ourselves from old emotional patterns that are literally written, inscribed on the white matter of our brain as a memory, as a record. It's called tarpaka. That means to record these old impressions. So if I don't go into that same cave that had a bear in it last time I went in there, you know better. You don't do the same thing again and again and again. And those records, some of them are really important, but some of them aren't. We have the ability to become conscious and rewrite them. And pranayama, and breathing, and meditation, they all change neuroplasticity. So they give us the freedom to stop riding the waves of our emotional ups and downs and get above that trough and find ourselves floating at a place where we're not affected by those emotional ups and downs anymore. You're literally free. Talk about enlightened. You are literally bringing more prana, more light, more oxygen into your tissues and not into your blood, because that's easy to do. Getting it from your blood to your tissues, that requires breathing technique. It requires Kumbhaka, which is breath retention, which Western medicine calls intermittent hypoxia, which has been proven to boost stem cells, increased nitric oxide, which is a Nobel Prize winning panacea molecule, increased what Lance Armstrong got busted for injecting, EPO, and transcription factors that protect your genome from expressing negative traits, as well as protect your endothelial growth factors for your health of your arteries. The list just goes on and on. So just like we know, like a little bit of calorie restriction, a little bit of eating less food, miraculous science behind that. A little bit of less air allows CO2, carbon, to build up in our body. And that's what triggers the release of the oxygen from your blood to your tissues. So hypoxia in your tissues is common, and that's cancer-provoking, increases what's called mutagenic stem cells. But when you actually hold your breath and do breath retention, it actually dumps the oxygen from your blood to your cells. It takes rid of the hypoxia, and it brings prana into every cell of your body at a very, very high rate that's been well documented. And the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are the first books ever written about yoga. They clearly say that pranayama is not pranayama unless you hold your breath and learn breath holds. So I wrote an article at lifespa.com called Strengthen Your Lungs Now and Pratiloma. Pratiloma is Pratiloma, Pratiloma, and it's a breathing technique that strengthens your diaphragm. And right now, in every hospital in the world, and actually now, because of new studies that have been just published on what Western medicine calls pratiloma, they call it inspiratory muscle training. That breathing technique, inspiratory muscle training, basically the exact same thing as pratiloma, a 2,000, 3,000-year-old breathing technique, is used in every single hospital and now recommended for COVID because it strengthens your diaphragm. And most people, studies with elite athletes found that when they measured their diaphragm function, half of them did not have a diaphragm that was fully contracting and relaxing. And studies show when the diaphragm doesn't contract or relax well, the diaphragm is not going to bring the air into the lower lobes of your lungs, where the parasympathetic calm nerves are, so it's not going to calm you down, rebuild, rejuvenate, and turn on your digestion. The diaphragm also, when it contracts, it sucks all the junky lymph out of your belly. So all the belly fat goes away. And studies show with women with, I just did a whole podcast on breast cancer, studies show that when women have breast cancer, a significant number of them have congestion in the lymphs around the diaphragm, the anterior diaphragmatic lymph nodes. So it's so important that you have a diaphragm that's working well. And pratiloma is so simple. All you do is you just pinch your nostrils. Take your fingers and close your nostrils 50 to 75%. And breathe in deeply in as you possibly can, all the way to the top. And when you do that, against the resistance of your nostrils, you'll feel your diaphragm contract. And when that diaphragm contracts, you'll feel it underneath your ribcage, like, wow, I never felt that before. Because you've never felt your diaphragm ever contract, because most of us breathe like little rabbits, because we sit around all day long and we don't breathe the way we were designed to breathe. And that's what James Nestor's book's all about. It's just so phenomenal. So you do 10 of those breaths. Breathe in through your nose against the partially contracted nostrils. Breathe out through your nose, no resistance at all. Do 10 of those, and then you rest. Do another 10, and you rest. Do another 10. If you do that for a week or 2 or 3 and you feel good, then you can start adding Kumbhaka or breath retention on the exhale. And my article, Strengthen Your Lungs Now, Pratiloma, will give you a step-by-step video of how to do both the introductory one and the breath hold version, and the article gives you all the science behind it as well. Absolutely and critically important, particularly in these times.
Oh my gosh. As I was doing that, because as you were describing it, of course, I was practicing it. And it really actually felt similar, the in-breath anyway, felt really similar to what it feels like when I breathe in my mask, actually, that resistance piece.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yes.
So I wonder what breathing through the masks is actually doing to us. I mean, obviously the carbon dioxide factor as well, but
there's a little bit of rebreathing of CO2, which is actually good for us, and it's forcing us to work a little bit harder, which is also really good for us. So there is a little bit of a silver lining, obviously a big benefit for our neighbors with the mask for sure. But yeah, there is definitely some benefit for that. But yeah, we have, it's called, look it up in the Western medicine research, inspiratory muscle training. Every hospital uses it around the world for heart failure, lung failure, and GERD, indigestion, heartburn. Literally, I have an article called Breathe Away Your Heartburn. It talks about that same breathing technique, pratyoloma, specifically for getting rid of heartburn. In the Western medicines, journals, the same journals that prescribe Prilosec. But they don't tell you to breathe. They just tell you to buy the pill. But studies, at least 15 or 20 studies showing that same breathing technique has been able to reverse GERD, gastroesophageal reflux. Crazy, right? No one tells you that.
It sounds crazy, but it's not. And it's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing this with people. And, it's like, yes, these practices that have been around for a really long time. And a lot of people are just discovering them. And you're one of the voices that's helping them do that. So thank you so much. If there's a best way for people to learn more about your work, I'm going to include details in the show notes. But if there's a best way for people to learn more about your work that you prefer, tell them.
Well, our website is lifespa.com, lifespa.com, and that's where all the articles about breathing and how to do it and the videos. Like we have thousands of videos and articles. So just search up what you want on there, sign up for our newsletter, and check out our podcast. We have a podcast every month, and now I bring on somebody who's way smarter than me, who I am so interested in their work. Like, for example, James Nestor, and next month we have the founder of Conscious Breathing, Anders Olsson from Sweden, who's a researcher on breathing as well. So we have a great lineup of people coming on our podcast here in short order.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.